This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. It is hot and heavy, NBA playoff style, man. It doesn't get much better than this. Time to raise the dead again. It's that time, man. You know how we roll, man. We're getting right close to that second round of playoff action. So that means some teams get knocked out. And that means the eulogies must be presided and presented correctly. And who better to do that than with my right-hand man, 50 grand, NBA aficionado, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC. My brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Let me ask you something, man. Should we have Kanye's hat say, make the NBA playoffs great again?
I'm not touching it. No, I think the NBA playoffs are doing just fine. Without the intervention of Mr. Kanye West, I miss the old Kanye for sure. But it's been a great playoff run. I think this first round as it's coming to a close, man. And this has just been amazing to go through these autopsy reports. So we have a bunch of teams we got to lay on the slab, dive on in. But as always, salute to you and all the fans of NBA Baseline. Thanks for tuning in. And I can't wait, as always, to jump into this week's content.
Oh, listen, man. I feel like this weekend is like the Walking Dead edition of the Baseline NBA podcast with the autopsy reports, man. I now understand what it's like to be a cast member of the CSI crime scene investigation, right? Like it's like because we're gonna have to seriously, start really, getting into digs of forensically looking at what happened to these teams and what's going to happen with them moving forward. And clearly there's three teams that got to get called out on it, right? So, of course, the breakdown is going to be our autopsy report, Minnesota Timberwolves, the Washington Wizards, and unfortunately the Oklahoma City Thunder. They all get put on the slab. We get to talk about them. And then in our subject of the drop, I know a lot of people are not going to be talking about this second round matchup. But given what the Utah Jazz has just done against the Oklahoma City Thunder, you'd be hard-pressed not to catch our preview of why we believe this may actually be a more closely contested series than a lot of people are giving it credence to. So definitely check out, this great upcoming episode. Once again, get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. Be sure to download any one of those platforms. Kick back, relax, throw the headphones on, plug in, and allow us to be your go-to resource, giving you what you need to know about this year's upcoming second round of the NBA playoffs. You know how we do, and you know how we roll. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it down.
To the bone gristle. Time now for the breakdown. Callie Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. And this is it, man, of course. That time again from Shaw and I to throw on the aprons, roll them down into the dungeon, and start breaking it down, man. Autopsy report style. Three teams this time around. It almost feels like we're studying a mass serial killer right now in the NBA playoffs. But the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Washington Wizards, and the Oklahoma City Thunder all felt their demise over the last 48 hours. And so it's only right that we break down each of these teams, what happened and what's going to need to happen for these teams moving forward. So let's first start off with the Minnesota Timberwolves, Shaw. I think we pretty much called this that while we were very impressed with what Minnesota has done, leaps and bounds better than what they looked like in the previous season, we just felt like they were no match for the Houston Rockets. The Rockets just basically dispensed to the Minnesota Timberwolves gentleman's sweep style. And you have to wonder, with the way that this team was beaten, where this team can improve. If it's a matter of improving personnel, or it's a matter of improving the way that they're approaching how they play against the better teams in the NBA, like the Houston Rockets or the Golden State Warriors, upper echelon teams. What is their approach, and whether or not we're talking about the maturation for guys like Karl Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins, and maybe even Jimmy Butler to take him to that next level?
This is a team where I think I'm not going to go into my usual, depth of conversation with Minnesota. Yeah, well, they're salary cap is kind of what it is. Like they're not going to improve in terms of getting free agents coming to this roster. But the main thing is that this was their first year together, and I think Thibs wants to give this group another run at it, and hopefully everybody can stay healthy. You can say that they shouldn't have been, the 8 seed had Butler been healthy all season long. Don't know what that would have meant, in terms of where they would have finished, and if they still would have been out in the first round. But at least they would have drawn a more favorable matchup that would have given them a better chance. I think this team that does just pretty much does need to stay together. I don't know how many options they have, to do other than that anyway. You really want to see, like you said, the maturation process of Butler, not Butler, sorry, of Wiggins and Towns. And those guys are getting used to the playoff intensity. And I think a lot of the pressure really is going to be on Wiggins directly. We talked at the beginning of the series of what his role was going to be. When he take on, say, listen, I'm going to be a defender. I'm going to let Butler and Towns score, and then I'll try to get my points where necessary. And he didn't really do that in any way, shape, or form. He still tried to get his buckets without really playing lockdown any type of defense. And I think they just got to find a more favorable role for him moving forward. The largest outlier on this roster to me is Gorgie Zhang, just in what they're going to do with him in terms of his playing time for the amount of money he receives.
Yeah, so that's a very good point to make, and maybe we'll get into the bench, really shortly. But there's a couple of things that really stood out to me about this team, Shaw, and it's raising questions about more Tom Thibodeau and what he's going to do with this team moving forward. I just looked up, if you go to Basketball Reference, obviously we'll get a lot of the content information. But I just found it interesting that for this year alone, Jimmy Butler averaged 15.6 field goal attempts. Andrew Wiggins averaged 15.9 field goal attempts. Karl Anthony Towns averaged 14.3 field goal attempts. I'm sorry, okay? But there's something wrong with this equation. Karl Anthony Towns is really by far your best basketball player. He has the most upside. And we even talked about this in the series against the Houston Rockets. There is no reason for Karl Anthony Towns to only have accumulated basically like 9 points or something like that in the course of a 2-game series against the best team in the Western Conference. Karl Anthony Towns is your best mismatch against most teams that play up against the Minnesota Timberwolves. And ultimately, Tom Thibodeau really needs to figure out a way of one or two things: to change the narrative of how many shots Karl Anthony Towns is taking on a per night basis, or you need to pick the pace up. The Minnesota Timberwolves, again, is not a good team when it comes to pace. And part of that is because they're not taking enough shots. If this is the amount of shots that your big three is taking through the course of the regular season, you are basically now resting on the fact that you have to be a better team defensively, which they ranked 27th in defensive rating, in order for you to equate what you're stopping other teams from doing that you're not capable of doing on your own. So they've got to fix something here come next year. If there's any expectation they're going to run with teams like the Houston Rockets or teams like the Golden State Warriors, who have far better pace and shoot up a lot more shots from their star players than what they're getting from their own star players so far this past season.
Yeah, I mean, you can start a hashtag, Towns touches. You know what I mean? That's really what it boils down to. He doesn't get enough looks down there in the post or on the block or anywhere that where he can be effective. And some of that is on him as well too, because he does like to be out there on the perimeter a little bit more. But they don't run a lot of pick and pop where he's getting the action, on the pass off the screen. And then he's not down there fighting for position on a regular basis. Every now and then you see him go down there, but just not enough for what his skill set allows. So I think it's on Thibodeau. It's on the offense and guys like Jeff Teague and even Jimmy Butler to get on the ball, but it's on him as well too. So everybody needs to be held accountable, and it is. Towns touches, that's something that needs to improve. And again, that comes with the maturation process of this roster and this team moving forward. A couple questions you just wonder, they still need more shooting. Belitza, I think his contract is going to be expired. So did they find a way to bring him back? I think he's 29, 30 years old. So I don't think he's going to come back at veteran minimum type of situation. So that's an issue that they're going to figure out. Crawford has a player option. You'll probably invoke that. But they have a draft pick probably to be in the last third of the draft. So, would they get some shooting with that? Whether that's probably at the 2 or the 3 guard, because I think Tyus Jones too is a nice guy that they're still a nice point guard that they're trying to develop behind Jeff Teague. They just need some more shooting to complement the play of Butler, Wiggins, and Towns.
What do you think? What else do you think really is kind of undermining this team's ability to be taken seriously as an upper tier basketball team? One of the things I look at is that they have a really funky looking bench, right? I don't know, maybe that's part of the struggles that Tom Thibodeau has, is when he can inject some of the players, the personnel that he has, to be able to maintain a high level of competitiveness against the better teams. To your point, you mentioned earlier about Gorgie Jang. I thought a couple years ago that the combination of Gorgie Jang and Kevin Love was a great twin tower type combination. Then Karl Anthony Towns comes in the mix, and for whatever reason, Gorgie Jang, who had improved in that previous season, coming into this particular season, just seems like he was a lost cause. So now it just makes you wonder: is what he needs after all of the trades, getting Taj Gibson, getting Jimmy Butler, is Gorgie Jang really what they do need moving forward? You really cannot put this guy on the bench. At some point, he's got to find some additional minutes, but you clearly can't find it in the scheme of things of what they're doing here in Minnesota. So, to your point, do they look to get more shooters at the expense of maybe figuring out a way to move Gorgie Jang? And if you are, so where's the depth come from for this Minnesota Timberwolves team? So you can clearly see that Tom Thibodeau went back to his old ways, dependent on his star players, probably even more so because he can't rely on his bench players to come in and relieve them when the stars come off.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think Zhang is a tradable pseudo asset. You just don't know what the value is around the league. He didn't have a great year, and that's a lot of because of how he was utilized. But he's figured out his game to the point where he can hit the corner three, very, very slow release on a set shot. But you give him a little bit of time, he can knock that down. Still a good passer, decent rebounder when he gets the minutes. But again, just in that scheme, it didn't really work out for him. So this is a team that out there that can use him and bring him in. The price tag isn't astronomical, so to speak, but it's just a matter of, okay, he's not super stretchy, but he can hit it if you give him enough time, as I said a little bit earlier on. So I think he is tradable. And I think there might be a team out there that might be saying, hey, well, we can, give you this wing player and that can improve. They also have Justin Patton on this roster, who obviously didn't play very much this season, had some injury problems and things of that nature. So they're probably going to be looking to develop him behind Towns as a backup big. So maybe Zhang does become expendable in that way, so they can get a wing player to help up some of that shooting that we're talking about.
All right, Shaw. Before we round this off and zip up the Minnesota Timberwolves here, kind of give me your assessment with Jeff Teague, Derrick Rose, and Taj Gibson. Who's improved, who's still lacking, who really took after their opportunities. Who's expendable when you look at these three guys. For me personally, I think that Derrick Rose needed this. I mean, I understand that, we were kind of egging on him because of all of the, things that he was going through when he came to Cleveland and, leaving the team and then coming back and, all of the drama that was going on there. And then we were really skeptical about where he was mentally, that he's going to just try and rekindle this through this bromance with him and Tom Thibodeau. But this might actually have been the best thing that ever happened to Derrick Rose, because, I mean, he basically was a godsend for that basketball team where they couldn't get, consistent scoring from Jamal Crawford and from their bench. He comes in and he really single-handedly really sparked this team to be competitive in the series against the Houston Rockets. But then, Jeff Teague, he also improved as well, too. I mean, I've always been down on Jeff Teague. You've never been a complete believer in Jeff Teague. I really think that he actually improved this year playing under Tom Thibodeau. So maybe he's kind of found himself a home where you can get maybe 2 good 3 years with him being the point guard. But this Taj Gibson thing, to me, man, I'm just, again, to me, is just another roll of dice, but just he is exactly who he was when given the keys in Chicago. He couldn't do it. When given the keys to Oklahoma City, he couldn't do it. And again, I'm looking at him and what he should have been doing for Minnesota. Couldn't do it again, man. That to me is what I'm looking at with these three. Are any of these guys expendable, and is any of these guys valuable enough to keep on the roster?
Well, I think they're going to keep Taj. I think you said it. He is who he is. A 12-7 type guy who's going to grab you some rebounds, play some tough defense, and just try not to get in the way. Now the guy too's figured out his range to at least to be able to hit, the 3-point shot if left wide open. So Gibson is a Tibbs guy. Nothing's going to happen there that I can see. I think Teague as well too. And then even with the addition of Rose, I think Rose coming on probably spells disaster more so for the guy I mentioned earlier, and Tyus Jones. So that might be another angle in which we could throw that out there, where maybe Tyus Jones and Zhang become available in drafts, or in trades, to help shore up maybe some of the rest of the roster again and go back into that shooting situation. That's if they want to bring Rose back. I mean, at the end of the day, he's 29. He's probably playing in the body of a 35 or 36-year-old, but Rose is still only 29 years old. So he played well in his time here in Minnesota towards the end of the season. So you just have to wonder, does Tibbs and company feel like, okay, he can be our backup point guard? But then that spells disaster for Tyus Jones.
All right, well, there you have it. The Minnesota Timberwolves 47-win season. We expect this team to probably hit that 50 mark if Jimmy Butler stays healthy next year, but they still have some work to do with this roster. But nonetheless, first round playoff exit. We got to body them up, but we still have to be impressed with what they've done in this part of the season. All right, Shaw, let's go ahead and switch gears to the next team that got ousted in the playoffs, and that's in the Eastern Conference, and that being the Washington Wizards. And look, I think we thought that for the Washington Wizards, while they were definitely competitive in this series against the Toronto Raptors, I think that this became more so about matchup for the Washington Wizards because they were not 100% healthy. And, unfortunately, Otto Porter going down in that game 6 against the Toronto Raptors, I think really hurt them and probably hurt what Scott Brooks wanted to try to do to strategize against the Toronto Raptors to try to push this to a game 7. But this still came down to matchups. And, this is a Washington Wizards team, Shaw, that they look like they want to be that team, and then they just show you that they don't want to be that team. And that's just so frustrating when you have a talented combination of Bradley Beal and John Wall at your disposal.
Well, yeah, I think this is a roster. We keep alluding to the fact that they, like you said, they're in, they're out, they're Jekyll, they're Hyde, and you just don't know which team you're going to get on a regular basis. But it was as competitive as we would have expected. I remember, I think you picked the same thing I did, Toronto in 7. And they ended up getting it done in 6 as a result of just some inconsistency. I think a lot with Washington's bench, which has been a problem for 3 years, 4 years in a row. Just how many times you're going to go into the playoffs and go into battle without addressing those needs. And the questions start to come up. I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago too, where hey, some of our summertime projections and things that could happen. I mentioned the fact that Wall as a guy that could potentially be moved in some sort of deal if Washington doesn't have a good showing in the playoffs. And you can argue that they had a decent showing. Toronto was the better team, as evidenced by them getting out of the series in 6. But this is, to me, where you just start to wonder, okay, well, again, do they like each other enough to continue this kind of underachieving, this atmosphere that they've displayed? And guys like Oubre and Otto Porter, are they going to develop? Can they develop with Wall and Beal being so ball dominant? Or is that on the offense? Do they need to do an offensive transformation in the way that Toronto did? And develop some bench guys and figure out ways to get some other guys out there. Gortat really not working for them at the center position. Again, he's serviceable, but he's definitely not doing enough, I think, for what this team needs in terms of championship aspiration. So this team has a lot of questions, and I hate to just say, well, the answer is trade John Wall or trade Bradley Beal, but you really start to wonder and scratch your head, well, what else are they going to do? Otherwise, they're just going to run it back, and probably be a 4 or 5 seed next year if they're all healthy. And then does that really mean that they're going to be championship level?
I have to ask you something, Shaw. That is it's something that I've been pondering. Look, you know how I felt about Otto Porter. I felt like Otto Porter, to me, is the one guy that has so much opportunity and promise to improve his game, where he's not limited in the sense that you already know what you're pretty much going to get with John Wall. It's just a question of whether or not he can take it to the next level. I think you know what you're going to get with Bradley Beal, even though he's only 24 years old. I'm waiting to see if Bradley Beal wants to be a 30-point per game scorer. But with Otto Porter, he's the kind of guy that I really feel like he can do so many things: score the basketball, distribute the basketball. He is limited because he's not great at taking guys off the dribble, but maybe in a good system, he can elevate his game to being an 18, 19 point type of player and probably giving you 6 or 7 assists per game easy in the systems that are out there right now in the way that we play the game in the NBA. I'm just curious, do you see that within Otto Porter? Because if you do, then I would be the first person to tell you I don't know now more than whether or not if that's what Scott Brooks believes in. And ultimately, this may mean that it's run its course with the Otto Porter project in Washington.
Well, it would be sad if it's run its course after they just re-upped on him last year, because he finished second or third in 3-point shooting last year and had a great season overall, playing off of John Wall. And I think a lot of conversation this season is like, well, not having Wall for 41 games impacted a guy like Porter and his ability to be effective. Listen, what I think of Otto Porter is I'm not quite as high on him as you are, but here's my comparison scale, so to speak. All right, I go all the way back, and it occurred to me throughout the playoffs, when I was watching some players, like Jeff Green was this guy. Everyone was like, he's got the talent, he's got the skills, he's got athleticism, and he should be X type of player. And then I'm looking at the Cavs roster, and I was like, damn, they got Rodney Hood. Rodney Hood is left-handed Jeff Green. He's got the skills, he's got the talent. But he's not that guy. Otto Porter is like a step and a half above those two players. Like he's very good. He's still young enough where he can develop into something, but he needs others to really kind of make him better. And he's going to need elite level players in essence to do that, like John Wall and Beal, to kind of make sure that he has the spacing and things he needs to get his shot off and to slash at the basket. Again, I think he could be a very good, impactful, elite rotation player in this league, but I don't see him as a star. I don't see him as somebody that a team in any way can ever rely upon, despite whatever his contract is. He's going to be a good fit in a nice system, but he's not the main guy ever.
Well, and I agree with you. I'm not saying that he should be a main guy, but what I guess to me, I see a level of contrast. He shot 50% this year in the regular season. He shot 44%, which is pretty much better than the rest of the stars. He shot better than Bradley Beal from 3 this year, right? And yet he's doing it only throwing up 11 shot attempts per night. So I guess my thing is that, there's some players that go out there and because they're just efficient at scoring, they deceptively look like they can give you 16, 17 points per game in their sleep. But let's be realistic. If you've got one of the fastest players on the court, granted, and that's you brought up a great point, that it's John Wall kind of running the show, so to speak. So because he was only there for half the games this season, it would have impacted maybe how many shot opportunities Otto Porter would get, more so than worrying about how many shot opportunities that Bradley Beal should be getting for this basketball team. I'm just saying that in a day and age when you've got guys that are versatile playing the 3, have the width maybe to hang around and probably play 4 when the small ball type of thing, that someone like Otto Porter at his age and what he has shown you already, given the irky-jerkiness of what's happened over the last 3 years with this team and this organization, that he probably has the most upside, probably more so in some respects to Bradley Beal, because with Bradley Beal, it's about him scoring the basketball. So he's either going to be vibing with John Wall to get those shots that he needs to get those 30 points per night, or he's got to do other things that's really going to accentuate why he should be an elite 2 guard in the game. But with Otto Porter, there's so many ways that you can go with him. And I agree with you. He's a step and a half above the Rodney Hoods and the Jeff Greens of the NBA. I'm just wondering if it's ran its course because of the system that Scott Brooks runs for the Washington Wizards.
Yeah, I mean, and it very well could have, but as you're having that conversation, it occurs to me, we might be looking at Otto Porter as he's not doing what Wiggins should be doing, or he's doing what Wiggins should be doing in Minnesota. But Wiggins should be kind of taking less shots and focusing on the other aspects of the game. Porter is doing that, and maybe Porter should be taking more shots, you know what I mean, and allowing some other people to maybe focus on the other aspects as well too. Again, it's a great question I think to have in a great conversation, especially in the case of Porter, because he has improved. He had a treacherous rookie season, and came back second, third year and played really, really, really well. I think this is a guy, even you see in the playoffs where those shot attempts even went down again. He took as many shots a game as Markieff Morris did, while Beal and Wall just ran around, 19 and 20 shots respectively, or give or take. So for me, I'd like to see what Washington is going to be able to do with Porters of the world. But if they were to try to move off of him, does that elevate Kelly Oubre? And I don't believe Oubre is ready to be that guy. Despite his trainer, who's very vocal on Instagram and Twitter, Drew Hanlon, a great trainer, who feels like Oubre is like the next man up. I don't believe Washington feels that. So they're going to have to get a lot from the rest of this roster outside of Wall and Beal if both of those guys even return next season.
Yeah, well, he may feel that Oubre is the next man up. I'm not buying into Kelly Oubre. I don't know what it is about this dude, Shaw, but I'm just not sold on him. I just feel like his mind just isn't completely there when it comes to getting ready to take that next step. I'm sorry, 27 and a half minutes and you're averaging maybe 12 points per game. Eric Gordon is 10 years older than this kid, right? And Eric Gordon averages more points. And maybe that's partly because of the type of way that he plays under Mike D'Antoni. But I see much more aggressiveness in Eric Gordon than I've seen in Kelly Oubre. And if you were to tell me that Kelly Oubre really should be their sixth man, he should be the guy that comes off and really helps accentuate a relieving minutes but scoring the basketball, he just doesn't do that. then you just don't know where he's at when it comes to playing defense. He's not as disciplined as I think as he needs to be. Then he loses it at times mentally when the opposing player gets in his head or gets up in his face, and then he does idiotic stuff that's either giving him technical fouls, or getting him ejected. And to me, it's too much for too young an age to be causing this kind of nonsense, and you're not a starter or a star in the NBA. Like, we can give it a pass when it's Boogie Cousins, but Kelly Oubre, he ain't on no Boogie Cousins level. So therefore, all of this type of stuff really accentuates why I don't think that he's ready. And if you put him on another basketball team, I can't guarantee that you're going to get any improvement from that part of it. But then it leads me to question, Shaw, how much longer do the Washington Wizards keep buying into the Kelly Oubre experiment?
So I think the situation with Oubre is very interesting because he's got a year or two left on his deal. And this will be his prove-it season here in 18 and 19. So they'll probably tender him a qualifying offer so that they can match anything. But I think a lot of what he does upcoming season is going to be predicated on what the roster around him is as well too. So if they move the Wall, Beal, or Porter or something like that too, then his role changes dramatically one way or the other. So I think it's going to be a wait and see approach with Oubre. They're not going to make any drastic moves with him. I don't think he's someone that's on the trade block right now because I don't think there's going to be any interest, in getting him, despite the fact that he has a favorable deal, and then you'd be able to trade him, and the team getting him would be able to get his rights, so to speak. But he's not somebody that I think is fully thought about in the plans in terms of development. He's a rotation guy. He's going to be there for at least for the next season per se, and then they'll kind of have to evaluate things after that.
All right, Washington Wizards finished second in the Southeast Division with a 43-39 record. Got ousted by the Toronto Raptors in the first round. Time to body up the Washington Wizards, but hopefully the Wizards organization can see bigger and brighter things moving forward with this basketball team. They took a step down in the regular season, I will say, Shaw. And ultimately, this is a talented basketball team that should be hanging around in the upper 40-50 range when it comes to wins. And hopefully, Scott Brooks will figure out a way to show a level of consistency that reinvigorates people's perceptions that this should be one of the more feared teams in the Eastern Conference. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our subject of the breakdown, the autopsy report. 3 teams getting bodied up in this show. And let's get right on to the third one. It's interesting, Shaw. I would have figured we would have needed an extended amount of time to talk about this third team, but probably because it's this third team that we may not even need that much time. And that's the Oklahoma City Thunder. This is a basketball team that came in with a 48-34 record. But when you look at this roster that was constructed, Russell Westbrook, Paul George, Carmelo Anthony, Steven Adams, and this all the talk about how Andre Robertson really impacted this basketball team. And I'm not really buying all of that. This team only amassed 48 wins. You look at when you have 3 guys like this, man, this should be 50 wins in their sleep, right? Like comatose. They should walk in with 50 wins, and they struggled to even get that. The Portland Trailblazers had a better record than them in the Northwest Division, Shaw. And it just begs to my imagination that while we often go with this whole thing about, sometimes guys need to get acclimated, you got to give them some time in order to figure things out and everything like that. We often talk about how 82 games may be too many games for guys in the NBA. So how many games is it really is necessary for a power-packed impact lineup like this, when the Oklahoma City Thunder, to be embarrassed the way that they were in the first round of the playoffs against, all due credit, the Utah Jazz, who definitely stepped up the game and exposed
let me say this
timidness
first and
of what we've
foremost with
seen from this
OKC.
Oklahoma City Thunder.
I would be a little bit surprised, to see if George doesn't come back and try to just say, hey, you know what? This was our first year. And I think that was a lot of the conversation that happened, post-game press conferences, et cetera. Sometimes it takes more than a year to get it together.
Well, did you hear how Paul George sounded? He didn't sound like someone that was as his humility exuded the idea that he's really heavily thinking about, hey, I need some form of hoops redemption here. Like, we can't go out like this. Forget it's the Utah Jazz. It's the way that he performed in the last game, in an elimination game, that really speaks volumes about, is your head and your heart really in this? After you saw the Utah Jazz go on that run and things just didn't turn out the way that they did. I'm just saying, I wasn't seeing that when I saw Paul George, give his comments in the post game press conference. That is telling me that his whole heart and mind is really
Well, my thing
concentrated and
about,
focused about coming
playoff
back one
P,
more
as
year
he,
and running with
dubbed himself,
Westbrook.
is that I've always said I like Paul George. He's an elite level talent, but there was just something always missing for him, for me. You know what I mean? I don't see him as the focal point of the offense, and that leader, that guy in the locker room, et cetera, et cetera. I've always said, and it's a kind of a twisty-ish type of term, and say he's a 1B, but he's not a 1A because his talent is 1A level, but he lacks those intangibles to me.
Charles, let me ask you something real quick. Did it surprise you that Paul George didn't take the onus to try and defend Donovan Mitchell in the waning minutes of that
Not
fourth
surprising
quarter
because he was
when
defending
it was
Donovan Mitchell
necessary?
for a majority of the season and still getting torched. And there was a lot of conversation about even what that looked like. You could be a great defender, and sometimes a guy just kind of has your number. And the way Mitchell moves, and he's a little bit smaller and crafty, and can fit into the tight spaces, and finish with English and contact. Some of that, again, not just because you're a great defender means you're going to lock down Everybody has somebody that kind of gets the best of them.
But I don't. But I'm not saying that it should be a question of, he's going to lock him down. I'm just talking about, listen, you came into this league being sought as one of the best two-way players in the game, meaning you play offense and you play defense. No one is questioning his offensive input. His offensive input is the only reason why this wasn't a sweep for the Oklahoma City Thunder. Okay, the first two games he was averaging close to 30 points per game. But I guess what I'm saying is I think it's about a mentality. It's an onus of something that to your point, Shaw, that I felt has been lost with Paul George since going back to when they were in the Eastern Conference the Eastern Conference final matchups against the Miami Heat. It seemed like he wanted that moment to play up against LeBron James. He wanted that moment to defend against the best player in the game of basketball, right? Okay, so you're not defending against the best player in basketball in Donovan Mitchell, but damn it, man, he is a rookie of the year for the reason. He is really one of the rising stars in the game. I'm just saying it's not just about the lockdown. It's just that mentality. I just felt like there was so much passiveness in Paul George in the way that he approached this. Like, hey, Russ, I got him. Like, it just seemed like he was conceding to the fact that I'm assigned to take Joe Ingles. That's what I got to do. Maybe because Billy Donovan is saying that that's what the matchup proposes, or whatever the case may be. I'm just saying I wasn't seeing that from Paul George in the desperation games 5 and game
Well,
6, that
I
made
think
me
I think
believe we're still
it's
talking about
strategy though, like
playoff
you
P
said.
here.
Again, because he did guard Mitchell for a large amount of the series without positive effects. So they think they switched him off of him right after that game where Russ said he was going to lock that crap down on Rubio the very next game. Russ found himself more on Mitchell and Paul George, kind of floating and switching on different guys. So, in that regard, it's concerning, but I think that's probably more of a coaching situation when it comes to that. The bigger question, though, really is, again, was with the rest of the roster and how they are going to matriculate into 18 and 19 season. Like, again, some of their veteran guys, you're not going to miss them. Nick Collison will probably retire, and kudos to him for a great, great career. But Raymond Felton, even Jeremy Grant, I think you probably got to bring back Corey Brewer and have him as part of that bench and that rotation. But that's if you're bringing back, Billy Donovan as a coach, where I think that's the whole reason he got as much attention and shine as he did on this roster, especially with Roberson being out. To me, this roster is very unbalanced. It's still extremely top heavy. Although Steven Adams had a great season, they just need more bench help. Or, you can always go the other route and say, well, is it Russ's fault? And is he not doing enough to get everybody involved? He's taking too many shots, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, look, I mean, Russell Westbrook, you get what you pay for with Russell Westbrook, and he's been giving you a lot. All right. Did he make some boneheaded moves or boneheaded mistakes in the fourth quarter of that game? Yes, but you know what? You can equally say he dropped like 45 points in the two elimination games that they basically played, right? He single-handedly put this team on his back and kept them from being embarrassed on their home court in game 5. So I don't want to hear people going on this whole rant about, Russell Westbrook, Russ is being Russ. Nobody wants to play with this dude. You know what? When guys don't want to own the moment, guys like the Paul Georges, guys like the Carmelo Anthonys, then you know what? That's what you're paying Russell Westbrook for, is to go and own the moment. And that's exactly what he did. And so if he makes a couple of boneheaded mistakes at the end of it, I can't necessarily fault that from him, because maybe he really doesn't see his teammates with the same angst, the same enthusiasm as he does about how he's approaching this game. Now, with that being said, I think it poses an even better question, Shaw. What the hell happened to Carmelo Anthony, not just in this series, but through this whole season? It's one thing when you're a legendary player, and you're Hall of Fame status. You've always averaged somewhere around 18 to 19 points per game, easy. But it's another thing when you absolutely disappear from the game, where you're not even as relevant to the idea or the notion that you could be a factor for this basketball team going into the next season. And I feel like that's where the talk is going to be about with Carmelo Anthony. Everyone makes it seem like, yo, this dude fell off like Dwayne Wade fell off. And it's just hard to imagine, because I still think that Carmelo Anthony has a place.
Well, I think that's a great way to move into my point too. Is like, I think the offense would need to change a little bit, and that would take Russ adjusting as well too. Again, it's just such a great example from a team right now when we talk about the Toronto Raptors and what they did offensively, and even at our earlier point of the year, even what the Pistons did. Like, listen, what we're doing offensively just isn't conducive for us. It's not working. So we've got to figure out a way to be better and get more ball movement. And that's what this NBA is now. It's no longer, we were in a very, very interesting time frame where I was like, oh, well, you need 3 stars, you need this and da da da. But now we're moving more towards, hey, well, you need to just have good ball movement. You need to have multiple versatile guys on the play on the court at all times. And if they happen to be 3 great superstars, well, then hey, even better. So, but Melo's not that anymore. So not to say that I don't think I'm definitely in the camp that Melo should be coming off the bench, and that's a conversation Donovan and the organization need to have to him when he's going to opt into his $28 million next year, without a doubt. So he'll be in OKC. But again, bringing him off the bench, finding a different role for him, going up against second units and things of that nature, we can kind of command the offense a little bit, but also change the offense as well too, where it's not just so much, hey, where he's just kind of being a spot up shooter, where he can get the ball on the block against like smaller forwards and things of that nature, and he can play mellow bully ball and can still be effective, especially at this age. He's going to probably go more to the physicality of his game right now as opposed to the finesse. And again, I think he's always been a nice hybrid of both of those mixes, to me, at least in my opinion. But I think they just got to figure out a better way to utilize him, and that should come with him coming off the bench next season. As of now, yeah, there's no indication, that would change. But again, you just never know. And Presti is not one to be fearful to shake things up. So if he feels like Donovan isn't the guy, and there's been a lot of conversation on talk radio and on by the blog boys and all that, then Donovan might not be the right coach, and they may need a stronger personality to handle Russ and the rest of these guys on this roster. But as of right now, I think Donovan's going to be there next season.
All right, the Oklahoma City Thunder finished with a 48-34 record, second in the Northwest Division. First round knockout by the Utah Jazz, and one of the more impressive performances in the NBA playoffs first round. So unfortunately, it's at the expense of a team that a lot of people thought that had they gotten to the playoffs, they would be one of the more dangerous teams to deal with if you were a Golden State Warrior or if you were a Houston Rockets. But Utah Jazz said, take note, zip them up, and they are now done for. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cali, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. This was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cali, Warren Shaw of The Baseline NBA podcast. And this week on The Drop, preview time, semifinal round matchup. First semifinal, or second semifinal. We already did the Western Conference semifinal preview between the Pelicans and the Warriors. Now it's time to do the Utah Jazz and the Houston Rockets. And, Shaw, I know a lot of people are looking at this and saying, if you were a betting man and if you were the Houston Rockets, would you rather see the Oklahoma City Thunder or would you rather see the Utah Jazz? And I got to tell you, man, after watching what the Utah Jazz did, not just against the Oklahoma City Thunder, but just as a unit, as a team defensively, what they did to Oklahoma City and what they've been doing in the second half of this season, if I were the Houston Rockets, man, I honestly feel like I would rather be playing the Oklahoma City Thunder in this next round, man.
And I can understand why. I think you just feel like OKC, there might be a little bit of dysfunction. And again, as we just talked about, in the breakdown portion, Russ maybe be trying to do too much, PG appearing and disappearing and all that. Whereas OKC, I mean, with the Utah Jazz, rather, you're going to get that consistent hard defense coming at you for a full 48. And a dynamic guy in Donovan Mitchell, who's going to be definitely putting pressure on your defense on the other side of the basketball. Utah is tough, man. And they acquitted themselves extremely well. Really did not shrink in the moment, and a lot of younger teams could have folded after blowing that 25-point lead, and within 8 minutes in the third quarter of that game 5 against OKC, they come back at home, get it done. And that's a testament to Quinn Snyder and what he's gotten his guys to be prepared for, and what they're ready to do in this NBA playoffs.
But there's something else that I've seen about this Utah Jazz team that we haven't seen in previous years. There's a level of physicality and toughness, not just in their core players, but even from their bench players, that I really think may pose as a challenge for the Houston Rockets. Let it not be said that Mike D'Antoni is one of the most innovative head coaches of our generation. Okay, he offensively gets the most out of his players, even his mediocre players. They somehow can shine on some nights, but they've never been the more physical basketball teams. We talked about the teams that D'Antoni used to coach with Phoenix, and we felt like you play up against a team like Greg Popovich's San Antonio Spurs at that time. You got, what I'm saying, bully boys like Robert Ory. You got that with guys like Jay Crowder. I forget who the one kid that they have off the bench, O'Neal. I forget.
Royce O'Neal.
Yeah,
Royce O'Neal.
these guys, they like to play physical, but more importantly, they have length and athleticism to their game, which I think can really be a problem for a team that likes to shoot the three. It means that they will narrow the distance in allowing that ball movement to get that really great open look. Now you are minimizing that amount of seconds that they have to shoot the basketball. And guys like Trevor Ariza, who tend to have like a slow trigger at times on the three, PJ Tucker. I mean, guys like Ryan Anderson is going to have to extend their range to shoot the three. Or guys like Chris Paul and James Harden are really going to have to be savvy and deep ball penetration in order to get those kickouts effective for those three balls to be shot. Because I will tell you that the Utah Jazz is among the best teams left in this playoff run who can stop and prevent teams from shooting the three with efficiency.
No, Utah is great. They really are. They they pay attention to detail when it comes to their defense, and they try to create some of their offense with the turnovers that are sometimes forced. But they do a lot of things just by, like you said, just by being physical and getting into guys. Gobert and Favors are a great tandem down there defensively. That a lot of conversation has not being had about what Favors' impact is playing alongside Gobert. We all know what Rudy's doing down there, but Favors is just as important. Well, not just as important, but almost as important to what they do, and trying to make sure that he can stand guys up in the paint and hedge on the picks and rolls and things of that nature. So this team is not going to back down. Joe Ingles sneaky as well too, stays in front of you, at least gets physical, doesn't just let people blow by him. He's gonna make you feel him, even if you are trying to put the ball on the ground against him. And then you guys like Jay Crowder, Wilson, as you alluded to, same thing. Very, very, very important defensively. One big question coming into the series, though, will be the health of Ricky Rubio. And that hamstring, because he's going to have to, try to slow Chris Paul down and getting out of that offense. But remember, Harden's just as efficient as, trying to getting Houston into the offense as well, too. But they're going to need all the defenders they can have on a regular basis to try to slow down this potent Houston attack.
Yeah, I can't tell you how vitally important Ricky Rubio, and it's hard to imagine that we're actually talking about this in this particular manner, but Ricky Rubio is Quinn Snyder's stabilizer. Okay, as far as keeping the offense flowing in a consistent manner and freeing up, you can clearly see how erratic Donovan Mitchell's play is when he's not playing next to Ricky Rubio. I think he turned the ball over like 6-7 times. There was one stretch where Russell Westbrook comes down, shoots the ball. Donovan Mitchell clears out. He tries to go on an ISO penetration. He gives up the basketball and literally has to, on a desperate move, steal the basketball back in order for him to go out and get his shot. I don't think that that's how the Utah Jazz is going to be able to maintain, offensively playing against the Houston Rockets. The Houston Rockets are a good defensive basketball team at times. the one thing that you struggle with if you're the Utah Jazz is your ability to consistently score the basketball. Because we've seen, and obviously it happened in game 5 where you have a 25-point lead, and then, you know what I'm saying, you can't hit the far side of a barn house, in that third quarter for an 8-minute stretch. You can't afford to do that against the top team in the Western Conference, literally the top team in the NBA. And that to me is going to be the one concern. If Ricky Rubio is not going to be on that basketball court for certain stretches of this series, I mean, it could actually be doom for the Utah Jazz. Like, I'm really looking for the Utah Jazz to make this a competitive series against the Houston Rockets. I think they have the swag, they got the favor for it. But if it's because Ricky Rubio is not out there, man, this could be a gentleman's sweep again, like, with the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Listen, I want to shout out Donovan Mitchell for what he did in the first round. 28 and a half, 7.2 rebounds.
Historic, man. Historic.
Just,
not in the last 30, 40 years has a rookie come in and did what Donovan Mitchell did in this first round, man. It's just absolutely phenomenal.
So no matter what happens, really at the end of the day, Utah is playing with house money. Again, they don't feel that way, and that's the most important thing. We talk about young teams and getting to the playoffs and kind of where they're at. I think that's the same thing that's going on in the Eastern Conference. Philadelphia 76ers, or they're no longer just happy to be here. They have goals. They expect to win games and expect to continue to push. I'm really interested though, and kind of switching gears a little bit, and what your thoughts are. What do you think this Gobert Capella matchup is going to look like? I think both teams need their guys to be effective, but Capella is more impactful for Houston on both sides because he gets all those lobs, passes from Harden and Paul. Where Gobert, sometimes he's impactful getting offensive rebounds, but more you see him more on the defensive side. Where do you think that matchup goes, and how important do you think it will be in this
series?
I'm
so glad you brought that up because that is my X factor. I know that we have X factors for, each team's respectively, but I just think as an X factor in this series that can sway the momentum of who makes the better adjustments, which are now, again, I'm saying that Mike D'Antoni is a good enough head coach that he should know how to make adjustments in order to combat whatever defensive schemes that Quinn Snyder is going to throw. And I'm also saying that people should not sleep on Quinn Snyder because over the last couple of years, he has rapidly proven why he should always be in the conversation of Coach of the Year. He makes great adjustments, and he's not making adjustments just with the personnel, but he's making adjustments with the strategy of how he uses his personnel. And this situation between Clint Capella and Rudy Gobert is so tantamount. The reason being is because I've noticed in this series, Rudy Gobert had to be more physical playing against Steven Adams. So Rudy Gobert can play physical, but there are moments where Rudy Gobert loses his cool. And he loses his cool at the expense of playing undisciplined defensive basketball, which puts him in foul trouble. And you got a free runner like Clint Capella running up and down the court, doing all these quirky, herky-jerky things. He's not your prototypical type center. He's not going to sit, back you down, do all of that kind of stuff. He comes around on areas to lob. It's going to be about the discipline of Rudy Gobert, his positioning to block out for rebounds, his ability to stay in the box and don't fall for these head fake jabs and things. If he gets himself in early foul trouble, it is going to be a feasting for Clint Capella in the box because the Utah Jazz legitimately don't have anyone with the same athleticism and movement that Clint Capella brings on the court. And if you're Rudy Gobert, I really think if you're Quinn Snyder, you need to figure out a way to get that ball to Rudy Gobert at times and punish Clint Capella, who is not disciplined on staying on guys that play low in the blocks.
Well, yeah, and I think with Gobert, that's harder because he's just not a typical post-up guy. You can't just throw it to him and say, go get us a basket. He gets a lot of stuff off different action, cuts, offensive tips, rebounds, things of that nature. Every now and then he runs a straight post-up, but it's just really not his game and not what Utah and Quinn Snyder are comfortable in essence in doing. But to your point on the other side, though, with Gobert and trying to defend Capella, his role is really going to be impacted to the thing we were talking about just before that, and that is the defense of the perimeter guys. If you have Harden and Paul in the lane, Gobert is going to have to step up in essence, and that's where Capella gets left open because the big guys get sucked in because they're paying so much attention to Harden and Paul coming off their screens or driving the lane, beating their man one-on-one. You get sucked in, and all of a sudden Capella ducks in behind you up in the air, and it's an easy dunk. The guards really have to do a great job of trying to limit penetration from Harden and Paul so that Gobert can, at least stay attached somewhat to Capella in one way or another. And I think, going into X factors, outside of Utah's overall defense, I think another guy that's going to play a big role is somebody we talked about a little bit earlier as well too. And I think it is going to be Jay Crowder, offensively and defensively. If he can give them something where he's 12, 13 points a night, and he can play his 28, 30 minutes, and be impactful, just taking turns and giving guys rest offensively and defensively, because they're going to have to put Mitchell on Paul probably, and maybe not have guard Harden so much. But even if he does, he's just going to need some rest time, and that's where Crowder's going to be able to come in and play off of guys like Ariza, and Crowder can go try to stick Chris Paul and James Harden to get that Mitchell can so he can rest and give them the offense that's necessary.
There's two major keys for this Utah Jazz team, Shaw, that I want to bring up before I ask you who you think wins this series and how many games. The first thing that I think, to your point, that's going to be important for the Utah Jazz is they're going to need to pick up the pace. They need to get more out on the fast break. You have a thoroughbred in Donovan Mitchell, and you really have some really good horses. Jay Crowder, he has a good motor. You got Joe Ingles, he's got a good motor, especially a trailer from the three. They've got to pick up the pace. They've got to be able to force the Houston Rockets to play transition defensive basketball. If they allow them to get into their half court sets, they get comfortable, they're going to force you to want to take shots. And if you're the Utah Jazz, I don't think that that's a good thing that you slow the game down, because I really do think that you have the kind of players that can get other guys on the opposing team in foul trouble. So that's one thing that I think is really important. The other thing that's important, I think, Shaw, is the defensive aspect of things. I don't know if you noticed this, but in that closeout game against the Oklahoma City Thunder, one of the clever things that I saw Quinn Snyder do against guys who like to kind of have full steam dribble penetration, like the Russell Westbrooks and the Paul George, back it out and try to go straight to the hole, is they formed a wall inside the paint in the interior. And they basically forced these Maverick-like guards to have to make a choice of where they're moving the basketball. Now, the disadvantage is Mike D'Antoni has two heady basketball players in Chris Paul and James Harden, and their pace is much slower. So if the Utah Jazz are going to play that kind of defense, they have to be more patient. They have to allow that ball to move, and then they have to move where the ball moves, rather than just close and then expect them to make a reckless pass or anything like that. I think if the Utah Jazz play that discipline, they can be effective with that wall guard play a little bit, closing them out, forcing Paul to back out, forcing James Harden to move the basketball side to side rather than coming down north or south. That will always give them an opportunity to have Houston take tougher shots. But with that being said, man, this is why I'm saying this is such an intriguing matchup, because you wouldn't be talking about this if the Utah Jazz didn't show this to you in the first round, which tells me that they really stepped their game up after the regular season and going into the first round of the playoffs. And they, to me, are the most prepared basketball team that could probably challenge the Houston Rockets between them and the Oklahoma City Thunder. So with all that being said, Shaw, who do you got and how many games?
I still got Houston. I think they're just too great.
After all of that, after my soliloquy, man, I didn't convince you to probably push this to 7?
Well, I mean, no, I can't see it. And at the end of the day, I'm hoping for a good series. I'm hoping Utah continues to play great, and understands the playoff pressure and gets this experience and grows from it and grows confidence in the series and that of itself. Again, right now, my prediction is still going to be that gentleman's sweep, as we alluded to in Houston in 5. But I would not be surprised to see Utah make it 6 or even 7 games. I would be surprised if Utah won the series. I'd be, dumbfounded by that. And then that would just circle the wagons on another Chris Paul and James Harden failure, not getting to the conference finals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I just think that's what it's going to be. Houston has the ability to continue to maybe to try to negate some of what Utah wants to do, is what you're doing too with the defense, because they can play guys like Tucker and Ryan Anderson, who at this point you have to even respect PJ Tucker out there on the perimeter. You can't just leave him alone at the 3-point line. He's still shooting 5 threes a game almost in the first round of the series, shooting almost 40%. So whether they have Tucker or Anderson out there at the 4, that forces Favors to stay attached and have to pay attention to those guys, because you can't just let them beat it by themselves in the corners or at the wings. Utah, very, very good team, good basketball organization, and they have their head on straight. Houston's just going to be too much talent-wise, putting too much pressure on them offensively.
The pendulum swings with Ricky Rubio and his health status for this series. If he's not going to participate in this series, gentleman's sweep. If he's going to be in the series but not be 100%, 6 games. If Ricky Rubio recovers, and I think that he can be very well effective and can definitely help this roster and the way that Quinn Snyder wants to strategize against the Houston. I mean, I can see this this Utah Jazz team pushing the Houston Rockets to a 7-game series. It's amazing to me because they are so good defensively and they're so versatile defensively that if they rest on that they can force the Houston Rockets, who have shown themselves to lull themselves into these games. They did it against Minnesota until they finally woke up and recognized they can't mess around with this team. I don't think that they get that kind of leeway with this Utah Jazz team. I think coming off of playing against a great tandem in George and Westbrook and Carmelo Anthony and the hype of the OK3 thing, I really think has this Utah Jazz team playing at another level. But again, if they don't have all their horses at 100% playing at this same kind of level they played in the first round, they could easily get gentlemanly swept. But I really can see this team going out in 6 games. Houston's going to win it. They're the better basketball team. James Harden is the MVP, and he's going to play like an MVP. This ain't the East. This ain't the finals, the Western Conference Finals. But I just don't think that the Utah Jazz is going to lie down just because it's such a great tandem of the great tandem of Chris Paul and James Harden. Wow. Woo. Good stuff, my brother. I'm ready to go. This needs to happen right now. Forget all of that. Let's start the playoffs right now.
Always, brother. Like I said, I think those are great points when it boils down to it too. Utah just gained so much experience just from playing against guys that are supposed to be better than them and having that star level Hall of Famers, so to speak, on the other side.
They ain't scared.
Yeah, and they're not. So they'll definitely give Houston all they can handle. So I think you're right. It's going to be a great series to watch overall. But it's been a great show in general. Autopsy reports of 3 teams, had to zip them all up, put them away in the freezer. We'll talk to you next season. And this great preview with the Houston Rockets and the Utah Jazz, man, as always, a pleasure. And I hope all our fans and listeners enjoy this show, bro.
Most definitely. So for the Baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.